For decades, we have been told that recycling is a key solution to environmental sustainability. We separate plastics, rinse our containers, and diligently sort our waste, believing we are making a difference. But what if the truth is far darker? What if recycling as we know it is fundamentally broken, economically unviable, and in many cases making environmental problems worse? One of the biggest misconceptions about recycling is that it is a cost-effective and profitable industry. In reality, recycling is expensive, inefficient, and rarely self-sustaining. Recycling plants require extensive labor, transportation, sorting, and cleaning, all of which drive up costs. Recycling a ton of plastic can cost between $72 and $150, while producing virgin plastic costs as little as $40 to $60 per ton. The price of recycled materials is highly volatile. Since China stopped accepting most U.S. recycling in 2018, global recycling markets have struggled, causing many municipalities to cut or scale back programs. Only 9% of all plastic ever produced has been recycled, mainly because most recycled materials are of lower quality and require further processing. The simple truth? It is often cheaper to produce new plastic, glass, and paper than it is to recycle them. Despite decades of public campaigns, recycling remains largely ineffective due to several key issues. Nearly 25% of materials placed in recycling bins are contaminated, wrong materials, food residue, etc., rendering them non-recyclable and sending them to landfills anyway. Not all plastics are recyclable. Only types 1, PET, and 2, HDPE, are commonly recycled, while most plastics, types 3 to 7, end up in landfills or incinerators. The U.S. lacks the facilities needed to process all collected recyclable waste. Many materials end up being exported to countries with even worse environmental regulations. Many consumers believe items like coffee cups, plastic bags, and greasy pizza boxes are recyclable when they are not, leading to further contamination. The result? Over 90% of plastics still end up in landfills, oceans, or incinerators. Recycling has been marketed as the perfect environmental solution. But in reality, this illusion was carefully crafted by industries that benefit from consumer ignorance. Major oil and plastic corporations have known since the 1970s that plastic recycling was not economically feasible, yet they pushed recycling as a public relations strategy to distract from the need to reduce plastic production. A 2020 investigation by NPR and PBS found internal documents from the American Chemistry Council and major oil companies admitting that plastics recycling would never be viable at scale. Cities and states continue to push recycling programs despite overwhelming evidence that most waste still ends up in landfills. Many municipalities have quietly stopped recycling certain materials due to rising costs, but continue to accept them in bins to avoid public backlash. Believing in recycling as a comprehensive solution has dangerous consequences. Consumers feel better about buying plastic packaged goods if they believe the waste will be recycled. This leads to higher production and waste generation, rather than reducing material use. For decades, wealthy nations shipped their waste to developing countries under the guise of recycling. After China's national sword policy in 2018, which banned most foreign recyclables, much of this waste was diverted to Southeast Asia, where it often gets dumped or burned. Recycling aluminum and glass is relatively energy efficient, but plastic and paper recycling require immense energy and water use, sometimes offsetting environmental benefits. The emissions from transporting and processing recyclables can be higher than simply landfilling some materials. If recycling is broken, what should we do instead? The focus needs to shift away from recycling and towards systemic change. Governments must ban single-use plastics and enforce regulations on excessive packaging. Corporations should be held accountable for the waste their products create. Consumers should prioritize buying in bulk, using reusable containers, and choosing minimally packaged goods. Most waste consists of organic materials, yet only 6% of food waste is composted. Biodegradable alternatives to plastic should be expanded, but only those that truly break down safely in the environment. Instead of consumers being responsible for recycling, manufacturers should be required to take back and process their own products. Europe has already implemented EPR systems that are more effective than traditional recycling models. Some materials that cannot be effectively recycled could be used in waste-to-energy plants, which generate electricity while reducing landfill use. While not a perfect solution, modern high-efficiency incineration plants produce far fewer emissions than landfills. The public needs to be informed about what actually gets recycled and how to prioritize waste reduction over blind faith in recycling. Governments should incentivize businesses to develop circular economies where materials are reused, not just recycled. Recycling, as it exists today, is largely a failure. It is an expensive, inefficient, and misleading system that does little to solve the environmental crisis. Instead, it serves as a convenient excuse for corporations and governments to avoid making real difficult changes to reduce waste production. If we truly want to address the waste crisis, we must stop clinging to the fantasy that recycling will save us. Instead, we must focus on reducing consumption, holding corporations accountable, and shifting towards sustainable materials and energy solutions. Recycling is not the solution. It never was. And unless we rethink our approach, it never will be. Like and share this video to increase awareness and help drive real change.